to, and I call the member for Kooyong and thank him for his attention to the time.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the Migration Amendment Temporary Sponsored Visas Bill 2013, a bill which will see Fair Work inspectors into every workplace where there are people with 457s, a bill which will see an increase in the regulation that employers will have to comply with if they want to bring people to this country on a 457. And I stand up before you, Mr Deputy Speaker, both in sorrow and in anger. I stand before you in sorrow because a once great Labor Party, and I must say the member for Werriwa and his brother, the member for Batman, and the member for Hotham, both who are in the chamber today, they were proud of the great Labor tradition that had produced great Labor leaders. But to stoop this low, to do the barracking of the union movement, to put handcuffs on employers around this country is a low point for your side of politics. And anger, Mr Deputy Speaker, I rise in anger because the Australian businesses, big and small, do not need another kick in the guts as this bill contemplates. Why are we here? Why are we debating this bill today? And we're debating this bill because the union movement has taken once again control of the Labor Party. The union movement represent only 13% of the private sector workforce around Australia. If you take into account public sector employees, it rises to 20%. But if you go to any Labor federal or state conference, the votes on the floor are 50%. 50%. And if you go to the Labor caucus, it's 100%. And if you go to the Minister for Workplace Relations, he's the former Secretary of the Australian Workers' Union, who Kathy Jackson, the former head of the HSU, has described as being Dracula in charge of the blood bank. So what we have before this House tonight, Mr Deputy Speaker, is just another bill in a litany of legislation which we've been asked to comment about, which is all about increasing the patronage and the power of the Australian union movement. Now, unions have an important role to play in society. I'd be the first to say that. But when they have too much control and when they raise false arguments about the 457 debate, for example, they are doing more harm than good to the Australian economy. And Mr Deputy Speaker, in this place, just the other day, we debated a bill about foreign workers on offshore resource activities like offshore oil rigs that they wanted to make subject again to the Migration Act and to receive visas. We've been debating in this place greater right of entry provisions which will ensure that no employee in Australia can eat their lunch in peace and quiet. No longer can they have a Coke and a fish and chips or a burger in peace and quiet. We've seen greenfield sites being subject to increased power from the union movement, and we've seen the abolition of the Australian Building and Construction Commission. A Building and Construction Commission which was a cop on the beat, which was designed to stop lawlessness in the construction and building sector and help produce billions of dollars of increased productivity gains for the Australian economy, and which came out of the Coal Royal Commission, which the Leader of the Opposition, now Tony Abbott, was instrumental in setting up. But all those elements of the workplace environment have been subjected by a grab for power and patronage by the Australian union movement. And tonight with this 457s bill, it's just the latest instalment in that. Now let me tell you about 457s, Mr Deputy Speaker. 457s are a very important element in the Australian economy. There are more than 108,000 people as of April this year who are here on a 457. That is less than 1% of the Australian economy. Those people are filling in voids in the workforce in areas like information technology, health, resources, doctors and nurses and engineers. These are people who are not seeking welfare from the Australian taxpayer. These are people who are not having the Australian taxpayer pay for their health or for their education. These are people who are coming to Australia to bring their skills to fill a void in the workforce. And they come here for up to 4 years. And they're allowed to go to and from Australia as they see fit, and they are able to bring their family here. Now, these 457s are in heavy use in Australia because there has been gaps in our labour force. Simple as that. In fact, 70% of people who are in Australia on a 457 are in a professional or managerial role. These are not all in a labourer type role. These are 70% are in a professional or managerial role. They're so important to the Australian economy that the Prime Minister's own Scottish Svengali, John McTernan, is here in Australia on a 457. No. It's absolutely right. So the member for Hughes says no. I can tell you, member for Hughes, it's right. He is here on a 457, and that is laughable.
Maybe that's the problem.
It is laughable. What is more, half of the members of the Transport Workers Union are here on a 457. They're here on a 457 working in the press office of the TWU, Tony Sheldon. The hypocrisy, the irony, the silliness of this debate is astounding. Now, the Labor Party will be damned by their own words when it comes to 457, because I want to share with the member for Hotham and the member for Werriwa some key words. This is what the Prime Minister has said about 457s, and I quote, "We will need skilled migration. I believe we've got the visa settings right, particularly with short-term 457 visas." How about that? Chris Bowen, who was then the Minister for Immigration, said that migration is shaped by Australia's economic needs and the temporary business 457 visa is a key pillar in this approach. So you've got the Prime Minister and you've got the Minister for Immigration. And what is more, the Prime Minister had the gall to say on the 457s, we inherited from the previous government a 457 temporary foreign worker visa program that was totally out of control. Well, if it was so totally out of control, Mr Deputy Speaker, why has the government seen more than a 20% increase in 457s over the last year? That's the obvious question. If there were so many problems with the 457 system, why has the Prime Minister and the Minister for Immigration gone on the record glorifying the 457 system and failing to do anything about the rorts that they said existed, and actually overseeing a massive increase in the number of people coming to Australia on a 457? That is the alarming irony in this debate. This government sat on its hands while the 457s was increasing in number, and now because the union movement have asked them to, they are making a political point. Now, the new Minister for Immigration has said that there's been 10,000 abuses of the 457s. He got that out of thin air, I say to my friend and colleague, the member for Aston. Why do I say he got it out of thin air? Because he produced no evidence to substantiate his claims. And in fact, he was contradicted by his own immigration officers. Dr. Wendy Southern, in a Senate inquiry, a senior official at the Department of Immigration and Citizenship, said the following. When asked about the number of 10,000, she said, quote, "We certainly did not provide advice around a number of 10,000. That's Wendy Southern. Then Diax, the Department of Immigration and Citizenship's first Assistant Secretary of the Migration and Visa Policy Division, said, "I am not in a position to provide advice in terms of what guided the Minister to talk about that number." And then you go on, Stephen Bolton, a Senior Advisor in the Employment, Education and Training at the Australian Chamber of Commerce, said, "Never to my knowledge has a figure so high been raised." Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, this is the problem here. The problem here is that the government has concocted an argument for political purposes and to increase the patronage of the unions. Innes Willocks, who's the head of the Australian Industry Group, says, and I quote, "The claims of out-of-control 457 visa numbers are little more than union-inspired scaremongering." Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, there is no other reason why the Labor Party is prepared to face these series of contradictions by their own senior officials, by industry groups, by their own words from the Prime Minister and from the Minister, unless, of course, this is about payback to the unions. Payback to the unions at a time that the Prime Minister is at her weakest political point. And the only thing standing between the Prime Minister and Kevin Rudd is the union leadership, and this is one of the demands of the union leadership. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, we do not want employers right around this country to be faced with the extra paperwork that will flow from the provisions of this bill. Because one of the provisions of this bill is requiring that employers do, quote, labour market testing before they go and hire someone on a 457. Well, labour market testing was already in for the years after 1996 and was deemed to be ineffective. And so the caravan moved on. But the Labor Party is now saying to employers, you can't get someone here on a 457 unless you've got support from Commonwealth or state authorities, unless you've shown you've done all this work to try to find somebody who doesn't need to come here on a 457. And you've got information showing that you've made a real effort in this regard. Now, this will only increase the costs to the employers who are looking for people to come on 457s. The second element of this bill, which we dislike intensely, is that you are going to send Fair Work inspectors into every workplace to police these 457s. This element of intrusion will be an extra burden to business when we've seen that you cannot substantiate your false claims about 10,000 abuses. And the fact is that you are spending more of taxpayers' money to create more Fair Work inspectors.
For the member for Kooyong, I'm not. So the use of the word "you"
is inappropriate. The Labor Party is spending more of the taxpayers' money to pay for more of these Fair Work inspectors to intrude into these employers' venues in order to hit them with a civil penalty. Well, that's just not good enough. And, Madam Speaker, you would think if you were going to introduce such controversial and detrimental legislative provisions into this place, that the government would have the courtesy of conducting a regulatory impact statement, but it hasn't. You have waived a regulatory impact statement from being conducted here. You have not allowed proper scrutiny by the relevant committees, and once again, you are bulldozing this parliament into approving your union-friendly legislation. Madam Speaker, I finish where I started, which is we cannot support this legislation when it increases the burden on employers and when it will have detrimental impacts on our economy, when the level of compliance is coming at a time when business owners and employers just do not need more compliance, and when it's a payback to the masters of the Labor Party in the union
The
movement.
member's
Thank you.
time has expired.